In today's Friday feeling about consumer information today, it has been a turbulent week in the news and what's happening to people, particularly when data is not collected, when data is not being used in an intelligent way, and how we are using data. One of the consequences of machine learning, and for those of you who have been following along about how machine learning data is used, is that our data, the information that we give either voluntarily or in an inferred manner, is used to train machines. It's part of a mosaic, and while our individual information may not be terribly useful in and of itself, when it's part of that big collection, that mosaic of training data, it becomes useful. When you have characteristics of age and gender and online behavior and preferences and search terms and social posts and emotions in text, all of that is a really rich corpus of information that machines can use to build models and to even expand and infer things. When we talk about machine learning and human resources, it's one of the most risky areas to use machine learning because we can create weak associations and inferred values that we should not be using in human resources. For example, if you took the movies and books and songs and political causes that somebody believed in and liked from Facebook data, for example, you could infer with an incredible degree of accuracy their age, their gender, their ethnicity, and all of these are things, of course, that you are explicitly disallowed from using in human resources. And so how that data is used is really important. We've voluntarily given companies, particularly social networks and large technology companies, enormous amounts of information for a while. And the more we do business online with vendors, with news services, with or local grocery store, the more those pieces of data can be used. Now, historically, companies, and the larger the company, the more true this tends to be, have been really bad at using data. They stuff it in desk drawers and stuff and just let it languish. But that's beginning to change. Companies, as the machine learning technology, as the AI technology becomes more available, becomes more accessible, that's starting to change. And so we have to give some thought to how our data is going to be used and what it's going to be used for. We see that already happening. Look at Europe and the GDPR legislation that was passed 2 years ago and began to be enforced this past May. In GDPR, consumers gain back the right to some of how the data is used, the right to provide affirmative consent for different purposes, the right to be forgotten, the right to port their data from one company to another. That's a hint at the future. As time goes on, consumers planetarily will need to insist on rights to their data and how it's used. And one of the things that I think is probably going to come up at some point once you have a couple of really big machine learning scandals will be companies asking for consent to use customer data for machine learning purposes, to train machines, and may even need to ask permission for either specific attributes to that data or for the privilege of creating inferred data sets from it. So again, going back to that earlier example with movies and books and songs, with those three data fields, again, you can make some very strong inferences about age and gender, ethnicity, possibly even language spoken, things like that. The consumer's not providing that information, but a machine can learn it from a training data set and use it with a high degree of accuracy. It is not unreasonable to think that consumers would earn the right, or would reclaim the right, I should say, to say to a company, you may not infer anything from my data, or you may only infer likely purchase behavior, or you may only infer advertising targeting. or you are explicitly disallowed from inferring age or gender or ethnicity or religion, because those use cases, again, we're creating inferred data that has the same potential impact on us as if we had actually provided that data. So just as it would be inappropriate for, say, a grocery store to say, well, what's your sexual orientation? Like, why does that matter? Just give me some freaking bag of apples. With the data we provide and the data that can be inferred, we may want to give some serious thought to saying, nope, you may not infer sexual orientation from my data. You may not infer any demographic data. You may only infer for a limited use case. If we, as a society and consumers, don't insist upon these rights and as we as business folks don't build our systems with this perspective, it is likely we will get ourselves into a lot of hot water. It is likely that we will potentially cause ourselves massive legal exposure. The first person who doesn't get hired and can provably demonstrate that a machine discriminated against them is going to open up a can of worms. Even more importantly, with all of the discussion about how Facebook in particular, but technology in general, can impact things like elections and operation of free societies, there is such a tremendous potential for the data that is out there to be misused in ways that we can't even necessarily forecast. Suppose, for example, you had a training data set that said this portion of the population tends not to vote during certain elections. Like, they don't show up at the midterm elections, they only show up at the big elections. And they have these characteristics, and you are able to infer age and gender and sexual orientation and ethnicity and religion. With that, you could then run voter suppression advertising to the rest of that segment and potentially change the outcome of an election, even if you never had those data characteristics, because you were just able to use machine learning to infer them. So we as technologists, as business people, as marketers, as data scientists, need to be very careful about what we use and have to start thinking in terms of consent for the use cases for personal data. As consumers, we definitely need to give some thought about what data we give to companies, but also start asking for companies, I want to opt into certain uses for my data, and I want to otherwise globally opt out of use cases that I have not given you specific explicit permission for. That's the only way we prevent machine learning technology from being badly misused. And in the long term, it serves all of our benefit, consumers and business people, to have a future where people give us permission. Because if we don't do that, then at some point, again, something bad will happen, and we will globally lose the right to do some of these really cool techniques because some idiot did the wrong thing. So a lot of potential problems down the road that we can today mitigate by thinking in a consent-first way for machine learning data. So that's today's Friday Feeling. As always, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and the newsletter. Hopefully, I can promise you we won't be using any of that. I won't be using any of that for machine learning. So please subscribe, and talk to you soon. Take care. If you want help with your company's data and analytics, visit braintrustinsights.com today and let us know how we can help you.